to Ode To Birth podcast. Today, I have the amazing Billie Harrigan, Mother Billie, back with us on the show, and I have some pretty deep questions for you, Mother Billie. And I love getting into the nitty gritty. I love being raw and speaking the truth on this show. And I know you also like doing the same and advocating for women and families in trying to help them achieve a physiological, undisturbed home birth. That is the goal with a lot
If
of people.
that's what they want. If that's not what if they don't want that, then there are lots of other options. So yeah, I'm here for that option if they want it.
Mm. Really, it's pick your own adventure. When you realize you're pregnant and then you have to birth this baby, you get to make the choice as to what it is that you want. And we were just talking about this before I press the record button about um, having choice and then becoming educated. And what we don't know, we don't know. And then we might set ourselves up for disaster or trauma. And this is something that I wanted to touch on today in asking you, Billie, where do you think families get screwed over? And why do they get screwed over? Is it a lack of education? Who is there to blame? Is it the family? Is it the system? Is it the baby? And another question that I want to roll into as well is just around hospital transfers and when a hospital transfer is truly warranted, when it makes sense, what sort of situation, like these are the quote unquote scary situations, high risk situations where if we don't go to the hospital, the baby's going to die or the mother's going to die. Right. So maybe I'll just leave it there. And if you feel inspired to touch on any of those topics, let's get into it.
Uh, okay, let's start with more or less what you touched on at the beginning. Why do women get screwed over? There is a mismatch between their desires and their desired outcome and the offering that exists. So I kind of liken it to saying before their birth, what they really want is the most perfectly prepared, thick New York ball steak that's juicy with baked potatoes, with all of the dressings, in which case you go to a restaurant that serves that. A common one in Canada is called keg. But instead, they walk into McDonald's and they say to McDonald's, I just want the most perfectly prepared steak. And McDonald's is like, yeah, so that's what, like a double cheeseburger with some fries? Because it's not on the menu. And even if they wanted to serve it, it's not in the kitchen. And even if it was in the kitchen, they're not trained to make it. So it's women, this unrealistic expectation that they're going to get an individualized experience, a supported experience that nurtures their wellness as a developing parent, that meets their psychospiritual needs, that equips them with empowerment. And they walk into a maternity service that is designed to disempower her, that is designed to put her on a conveyor belt of one size fits all, and to deliver the services that they have and with the training that they have. And it's like going into McDonald's and wanting a gourmet meal. You're not going to get it. So it's this mismatch. Now, if you like McDonald's, well, then heck yes, you know where to get it. And if you want the hospital experience of this illusion of safety and the ritual disempowerment that says if you're here and you lie down and you spread and you let us do these things to you, then you and your baby will be very safe. I mean, there's nothing to support that, but that's the belief system. And if that's what they want, it's right there. Enjoy. When I have consultations and somebody says, I had a great experience, and I say, well, that's because what you wanted was the service they gave you. And when they don't have a good experience, it's because they wanted something, but it wasn't available. So we can't go into McDonald's berating them and abusing them for not being able to create gourmet meals. It's not on the menu. So I think, can we stop this idea that if we just fight the system and fight their training and fight their belief system, we'll start getting what we want. It's not on the menu. It's not in the kitchen. You got to go somewhere else.
They're not taught physiological birth, right? An obstetrician is a surgeon. That's what they do. They know how to sedate people, and they know how to get people to abide by this. I would say it's very much this good girl complex. Just be a good girl, and we'll get this baby out of you safely, even if it means traumatizing you and interfering with your physiological breastfeeding experience as well. Because what we know with some of the medications that are administered during the birthing process in the hospital, i.e., Pitocin, the ability to breastfeed naturally is messed with, right? And then we're left feeling disempowered. The woman is left feeling disempowered. And also, she sucks because she can't breastfeed her baby naturally. And so she needs to top up with formula and this disconnection. There's a bit of disconnection, a lot of disconnection between the mother and baby dyad, right? So it sounds so dark. It sounds so terrible. But unfortunately, it's a reality for so many people on the planet right now.
There's also a purpose to the disempowerment and the coercion to gain acquiescence that is not entirely nefarious. I mean, we tend to think everything that happens to us in that system is nefarious, unless a life is truly saved, which does happen. They run on well-rehearsed systems of behaviors. And these well-rehearsed systems of behaviors to respond to an emerging medical crisis or a medical crisis requires the cooperation of the patient. If you're not getting the cooperation of the patient, this well-rehearsed system of behaviors becomes disorganized, ineffective, and could potentially put the patient's life in jeopardy. So there is that reason of gaining the patient's cooperation in their systems, because how they are trained is to deliver it as a cohesive unit, and the patient has to cooperate. So, I mean, that's not a nefarious intent in that situation, but the outcome, we have to reevaluate the outcome beyond the 6-week checkup. How is she doing? And how's the baby doing? And what is considered a positive outcome? Is it just the fact that both of them lived? That's a pretty low bar. Could we aim for something a little higher? But then again, perhaps it's not on the menu. Her psychological well-being just may not be on the menu. And the mother-infant attachment may not be on the menu. So we may have to look a little further than that and say, do we want to come out alive? The likelihood is you will. The likelihood is anyway, if you're in a high-resource nation. That's the likelihood anyway.
Right. And then what happens when a woman... Okay, so I'm working with clients that are really wanting to achieve undisturbed physiological home birth. So say we've been laboring for 3 or 4 days, which is quite common for a primate mother, someone who's birthing for the first time. And we're in the process, and now she's been pushing for 5 hours, hard bearing down pushing, right? We could see that her body is trying to expel this baby out of her body. Something's in the way. There's some sort of impaction. And now I'm not trained to stick my fingers up inside and feel around to see what's going on. Okay. Nor do I necessarily really want to do that because I don't do it all the time. And I'm kind of just not skilled in that way. And my guess is just as good as hers. If she stuck her own fingers up inside, maybe she could discover something's going on. So I can encourage her to do that. But we've been pushing for 4 or 5 or 6 hours. And as you could tell, this baby's really trying to come out. And the mother feels intuitively like something is wrong and is telling me, I think we should transfer. Something must be wrong, right? In those moments, okay, we listen to you. We listen to your instincts. Let's go to the hospital. Let's see what's wrong. The few times that this has happened, it's like nothing is wrong. It's just taking time. And we have to trust the body. Okay, so let's get our butts back to the house. Now that we know that nothing is impacting the baby's descent, we can birth our baby safely at home. But there's something in a woman's psyche, Billie, that I feel like it's this program that's running in the collective mind of women that believes that our babies just can't come out without help, without the support of an obstetrician or a registered midwife or a medical care provider. And there's some sort of energetic block, call me crazy, that is really inhibiting them from fully surrendering into this process. And then there has been a certain situations where we do go to the hospital and the doctors say, oh, well, you have a swollen anterior lip, cervical lip theory. Right? So you actually can't birth this baby on your own. This is the problem. So we're going to push that cervix out of the way and extract your baby. So I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but I just want to share with you kind of my experience as a birth attendant in the last 5 years, where I've really noticed that it's been hard for women to totally surrender into the process and the faith and trust that their body can do this without any support. How have you seen that transform over the years for yourself? Do you notice some sort of psychological block or block within the psyche or the collective of women in believing that their bodies can birth their babies without much support?
Sheila Stubbs, a remarkable woman, wrote a book called Birthing the Easy Way from Someone Who Learned the Hard Way. And as part of her investigation for the book, she was asking women of a previous generation, were they frightened of childbirth? And they were like, no. I mean, they were worried something would happen afterwards. Maybe the baby would develop an infection that they didn't have a medication or antibiotics for, or would become injured from farm equipment. But having the baby? No. That was just kind of just a ridiculous thought to them. But that has shifted, and we live in a culture of extreme birth fright, fight of birth. And that, I think, is largely due to some pretty successful marketing in the 1970s and 80s, when we were far less afraid of birth. We just started having babies at home. Wait, what? Excuse me? Home birth midwifery? No. Do you know all the terrible things that happen? Here in Ontario in, I believe it was 1987, family physicians, if they wanted to, they attended home births. Not many did, but some did. And the Ontario Medical Association said, no more, you lose your hospital privileges. So they knew it was safe and they knew it was a political move, but the next physicians who were trained and then entered the industry knew that they couldn't or they'd lose hospital privileges. Why? It's terrifying. It's so many bad things happen. So the shift was, in my personal experience and opinion, is that it was largely political, and it had to do with sales management to change the culture of birth so that it now became dreadfully frightening. In the same way that in 2019, out of nowhere, air quotes for those listening, the WHO decided that one of the greatest 10 health threats to global well-being was vaccine hesitancy.
Hmm.
Oh, wait, what? Where'd that come from? Then started the online campaigns, then started social media, then started vilifying the anti-vaxxers. And then along comes a declared pandemic based on changed guidelines. And out comes this universal injection that is going to save us all. Marketing. Market the fright, market the denigration of those who don't comply, and then market the solutions. So this incredible birth fright, I believe, is in part, a well-orchestrated global campaign to get women back into established power structures that are collapsing.
Yeah.
And so women are terrified. Also, because of the over medicalization of birth, we have few generations now of nothing but horrible birth stories. Women tell horror stories because their births were horrible. So we've got a couple of generations, 2, 3, 4, from the over medicalization of childbirth, where everybody has a horrible story to tell of how awful it was, how terrible it was. Well, it's not blamed on the power structure that created it. It's blamed on birth. So now birth's terribly frightening and women are terrified something awful is going to happen to them.
Mm.
Well, it's been planted and programmed in part. But yeah, it's a cultural phenomenon.
And our culture is afraid of death, terrified at the thought of death, right? And we talked about this in our last interview, and how the feminine, it's interesting because the feminine should understand and know death and befriend death, because we're bleeding every month. We're shedding a part of our uterus, a lining of our uterus every month. We know death, and yet it's not honored. There's no reverence for the experience of letting go. And I believe, these souls that are coming through and onto the planet here are here to do quite a lot of work. And they're recognizing the intensity of the planet, the dense energies here on the planet. And they know that it's going to require a lot of willpower, confidence, motivation to get shit moving and to create a more happier and healthier planet. Um, but that requires a lot of will and the will to live. So, as the vessel, here we are, the feminine, calling in these souls and being the vessel for them to land upon. Um, I think it's okay to accept that this baby might not make it if it comes onto the planet and realizes there's a little bit more work to do back in the astrals. And that's hard to accept for a lot of women. But this is just what I'm seeing in the work that I'm doing now, is that there's a lot of loss, a lot of death, a lot of miscarriage, a lot of stillbirth. And it doesn't seem so scary for me. It's becoming really normal. And I want to share that with other women that are listening to this episode today and are trying to get pregnant, or they are trying to recover from loss. Is that, to me, this seems very normal. The process of life and death and rebirth. We know this, we understand this. There's generations of women that had a lot of respect and love for the process of loss. So I don't know how we can reclaim it and be able to honor death in a way that feels safe and beautiful, but we're getting there. Yeah, death just doesn't feel as dark and scary for me anymore. It feels like my friend, and there's a lot of peace in death, I find, as well, right? And in shedding the a spirit baby coming through and then losing that energy, I feel it's just a way to kind of reset the womb space and clear a lot of energy from the womb space. And that's a lot of ancestral work that's being done. The matrilineage is moving through quite a lot of change and morphing into something different to support new life. Yeah, so I'm just going off now on a tangent about death. This keeps coming up in every episode that I'm doing here, Billie. It's like, how can we honor death in a way that, yeah, so that we're not so afraid to birth. We're not so afraid to surrender into the process of birth, the liminal realms of birth, right? Where there's so much joy and ecstasy and even orgasm, right? So, yeah.
A first loss, what happens for most women who lose a pregnancy or a stillbirth is a loss of innocence. They now know. I mean, they do anyway, intellectually, they know not everything works out. But having experienced it and embodied it, and in their own bodies, they carry both life and death within days of each other. And that loss leads to a loss of innocence. Nothing is ever as optimistic as it once was. And I do believe that humans as a species are a fairly optimistic species. We are driven by oxytocin in our parasympathetic nervous system, the hormone of love and connection. I think we're an optimistic species. And the loss of a pregnancy shatters that innocence. And from then on, she knows, like, yes, the likelihood is this pregnancy will conclude with a live birth, but it may not. And yes, the likelihood is this baby will make it to its birth and beyond, but it may not. So that innocence is gone, and it is a reset. But with it is the opportunity for increased connection to others in that loss of innocence, and finding a different kind of optimism. That optimism isn't, oh, it always works out, because it just will. It's not it. The optimism is more, I'll survive. I will come through this, and I will create a different kind of wholeness through the experience. So the optimism is a little different after that. But I think it's
Mm,
creating, because there are more stillbirths, there are more miscarriages right now. I think there is this opportunity for we women to connect with each other through those experiences and create an optimism of growth and depth.
I totally agree. Totally agree. Someone said something to me yesterday and I want to share it. It's a pretty bold statement. And you saying that through the loss, there's loss of innocence. I just think of a little girl, right? And someone said this to me yesterday. She goes, "You know what, Madison? Free birth is not for girls, or birthing outside of the system is not for girls. Because when you choose to birth outside of the system, you are owning your power as a woman. You're not a little girl anymore. You're choosing to step into your divine femininity, your womanhood, it's that warrior woman within you, right? You're not a scared little girl. You are a woman, and you are a mother. And that's an initiation, quite a powerful one. So I really felt that to be true, because there is a difference in the energy of someone, of a client who is choosing to birth inside the system and get the epidural and not feel any pain, versus the woman who is ready to step into the fire and jump off the cliff and say, let's do it. Whatever's going to happen will happen. I have full trust. I can do this. My uterus knows what it's doing. My fundus is strong. My baby is wise, right? These are the affirmations that I'm hearing from the people that are choosing to birth at home outside of the system, versus, I don't know, I don't want to feel any pain. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that type of person, that type of woman, but it's different. It's definitely different.
The thinking of many people who choose to birth outside the system is they honor the utter courage of women who go into hospital birth, because it's a scary place to be,
Yeah,
where the outcomes are not very good. And they honor that courage to do that.
right. Subjecting themselves to these operating procedures that usually end up in cesarean.
And they do it because they love their babies.
Mhm. Yeah. And to have that initial imprint at home in a dim, quiet environment is another reason as to why clients are wanting to birth at home outside of the system. A lot of families are saying, I just don't want a stranger touching to be the first one to touch my baby. I want to be the first person to touch my baby and kiss my baby and have them on my warm skin instead of into sterile gloves, bright lights, cold environment.
They want the initial priming of their baby's autonomic nervous system to be set towards um, its parasympathetic operating system, towards calm and connected, towards oxytocin, towards safety, for the first imprint of the baby to be one of safety, rather than its first imprint to come out to pull out, scrub the kid down, dry the kid off, plug, cut, which is a horrific shock to an infant's developing nervous system. And I think because of that, personal thought is, when that gets triggered, I think most of us probably spend the rest of our lives trying to turn it off. We've been triggered into fight or flight, autonomic, sympathetic mode. And for the rest of our lives, what do? We take up meditation, yoga, prayer, weed, alcohol, encounters, trying to bring our nervous system back down and reset it. I think that the priming of our initial experience at birth matters.
But what happens if things are looking south? What happens if we're at home and we're trying to achieve this physiological undisturbed home birth, and things are looking sideways? There's this anomaly situation that's occurring. What would that be, Billy? And what would that look like? And what are we doing as attendants to support that process? And what is a family doing to ensure that they're not getting totally brutalized and traumatized even more through this anomaly situation?
Not everything can or should be solved at home holistically. We're not medical care practitioners. We don't carry drugs. We're not legally allowed to. Many of the skills of holistic midwifery, which we are not using the M word, but that skill set have been lost to us. They were burned at the stake. It wasn't written down. They were the granny midwives in the US who would go to thousands of births and never lose a single mother. They knew things we don't know. Though that's been lost to us, I believe. Hopefully not, but it's not easily found. So we have a reservoir of lost information. And without that, there are things that we can't do and shouldn't do at home with the skill sets that we do have. We're not going to take up carrying drugs. For that, we would become licensed medical practitioners. And that's not why our clients want us there. So there has to be wisdom and there has to be discernment to say, can this be solved holistically without harm to the mother or the baby? Or is this something that you need to escalate to medical services because that's why they're there? Medical services exist for one purpose only, to deliver medical care in a medical situation. But it has become a belief system so that when what is more common, and certainly there are pockets where it's more toxic than other areas, and in particularly toxic areas, the mother heads to a hospital to say, I now have a medical situation, you have medical skills, this is a medical facility, I've come for help. Wait, what? Why weren't you here when you didn't need us? Why weren't you here from the very beginning? Why didn't you, you know, dedicate and put your child on the altar of modern medicine to sacrifice to us when you didn't need us? So what do you mean now you expect us to help you? Do you really think you're going to show up at my medical facility and get medical care without having done it before you needed it? And this is what greets women when they get there,
Mm.
because it's a belief system that is driving this, a belief system that what they do is necessary, what they do is wholly, entirely benevolent, and what they do routinely saves almost every single life. And under that belief system, it is absolutely unfathomable that somebody would show up asking for medical care during a medical situation when they weren't here when they didn't need it. So, how do you prevent the traumatization of the mother when she gets there? Pray to God. It depends on who's there. What's their belief system and what are they willing? How are they giving themselves permission to treat the person in front of them who needs help? What do they give themselves permission to do? Now, yes, it's systemic, but there's something that has gone awry in those individuals who give themselves permission to abuse the person who came to them for help when their only reason for existing is to provide that help. I mean,
Right.
professionally, obviously, in the bigger picture, they exist for a number of reasons, but professionally.
I'd like to live in a world where, yeah, we can show up and just say, we're birthing this baby and it's looking dangerous. There looks like there's imminent danger to the mother and the baby. Let's just focus on that instead of have to deal with that cloud of fog of shame and guilt. And oh my gosh, judgment. You were trying to do a home birth. You're crazy. No wonder you're here. Right.
Mhm. There's no reason to punish somebody who needs help and accesses help when they need it.
Mm.
I mean, that isn't that the marker of somebody stepping into their responsibility for themselves and their child to say, well, I'm now at a situation that requires help. I have reported for help. Can I please get help? And it's like, oh, well, we better call social services because when you didn't need help, you didn't come to us.
Right. And they're rolling their eyes, and it's such an inconvenience because you weren't registered into the system. And so now they have to put you through triage, and you're using up their resources and getting in the way from other people of getting help. Like, oh my gosh, really?
And we have to acknowledge the needs of the practitioner as well. They need information. They need to know what they're dealing with.
Mm.
And what has created really a far more dangerous situation than it needs to be because of the ritualized abuse of the person who comes asking for help. They don't disclose the full truth that would enable the practitioner to more adequately and accurately provide services. Because if they disclose, well, no, that's going to be used against them. Social services will be investigating. So there's this the trust has been broken, and it wasn't on our end. And the trust has been broken, and unfortunately, this situation is such that some women don't feel safe enough to disclose a full history that would enable the practitioner to more accurately treat them.
Right. Now, is this happening very often in Ontario? Because I'm not seeing so much of this in British Columbia, quite honestly. I'm not seeing a ton of judgment and CPS situations. Maybe I've just been lucky enough to have been in situations where we're not seeing this. I know it does happen, but I haven't seen it myself here in British Columbia. But I am familiar with it happening a lot more often in the States, in America. How is it in Ontario?
It's bad.
Really bad.
It's bad. Mhm. As part of my private member association, what I hope is eventually we will have advocates, lawyers who know how to um, intervene in a way with these social services to de escalate situations and come to a more collaborative resolution.
Mm. Yeah, one thing I have heard of is it's the Aboriginal families that are suffering and having to deal with CPS, the marginalized groups that are dealing with the more so abuse and shame and guilt parade. How dare you try to birth your baby in your home? Right.
Um, I think it's anybody that can be taken advantage of, really anybody, not necessarily ethnicity. Probably is, but if so, it's based on are they more easily taken advantage of. I had a consultation with a woman who was came to Canada to have her baby. She did have relatives here, and because she was not, she lived in another country, white, English speaking, so it was not an ethnicity based on that. I mean, it depends on where you live, what the ethnic bias is. I mean, because it's here, we think that the entire world favors white people. Not necessarily, depends on where you live. But she was told by her practitioner that as a visitor to Canada, her baby, it was the law that the baby had to come out at 41 weeks. That was the law. And if she didn't come in and report, well, then the police would be called. Like, excuse me? This was in Toronto. And that practitioner gave themselves permission to say that to their patient. Like, what happens in their moral compass that it gets so twisted that they give themselves permission to do that?
They're bullies. Yeah. So this is why women are choosing to birth outside of the system, Billie.
That's the
Take the risk
reason. Yes. Yes.
and take the risk and hire birth attendants, traditional birth companions that are moving through your program, that are well versed in physiological birth, that understand that birth is possible at home and happens quite perfectly at home when well supported and feeling safe. And when we go back into that energy of the mammal who just needs a dimly lit, warm, trusting environment in order to feel safe to open, soften, and open and surrender into that liminal space of birth. My next question is around unresolved trauma that we hold in our womb. So there's, like I was saying before, there seems to be something within the psyche of the feminine that inhibits certain women to surrender into the process and really genuinely feel like something is wrong and something is getting in the way. And we talked about this last week when we had a conversation, and I wanted to elaborate on it today in regards to unresolved trauma in the womb space. What does that mean?
What does it mean to you?
So, what I'm noticing is that we have intergenerational trauma woven within the cellular matrix of our womb. And we have this giant organ with so much muscular tissue. And I believe that cells hold on to memories. And so we're holding on to the memories of our mother, of her mother, and her mother, and this matrilineage of energy that is woven within our womb space. And yes, we're shedding and bleeding if we give ourselves the opportunity to shed and bleed every month. Um, but that doesn't mean that all those memories of pain and trauma and suffering and abuse are released before the time of our birth. So I wonder if there's intergenerational trauma that's getting in the way and leading us to believe that we can't birth our babies without the support of forceps or the support of a vacuum or cesarean, right? So, what I'm trying to get at here is that if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't yet given birth, this is something you should be looking at and thinking about and pondering upon before you birth your baby, because there could be this unresolved trauma hidden within the cellular matrix of your womb space that's getting in the way of you being able to surrender into the process of your birth. So, does that sound totally out of this world crazy to you, Billie? Am I just
Oh,
speaking with my
no,
ass
we
here?
all carry within us the mitochondrial DNA of the women who came before us. So
Yeah.
yes, we do carry that genetic imprint, that genetic memory. We do carry it. It's in our mitochondria, and it comes from our mothers. So we are carrying the previous trauma of our mothers. We carry within us the cellular memory of those who came before who survived. Um, we are the consequence of women who survived to have babies. So we do carry the memory of the women who birthed before us. Does that get in the way? Um, I would not put that as a you know a label or stamp or a calling or a premonition or a proclamation on any woman. No, because we're all walking around with it, and not everybody has a challenging birth. I think there is some good work to do to deconstruct the programmed fear. I think there's some good work to do to look at what our own belief systems are, because I think our own belief systems really play into this. Do we personally did we drink the tea? Did we personally drink the Kool-Aid on thank goodness, women used to die in droves until the hospital came. Do we believe that? Well, maybe I'd pick up a good book and find out. So if there is, I think it is worthwhile to look at belief systems heading into it. But I think we also need to be a lot kinder to ourselves. I have observed that, and it's happened fairly often, women hire a companion. They say, that's it, we're birthing this baby at home. But there's always a little bit of a toe in the other door. Not necessarily a whole foot, but there's always a little toe in there, in the other door of the medicalized birth model. And the labor may be unfolding to the point where she says, that's it, I'm going. Absolutely. We follow you. And as companions, we're like, could we have done anything else? Was there an affirmation we could have given her? Was there more snacks, honey? Maybe we might have considered some homeopathy. Was there a warmer, kinder environment we could have offered? And we're racking our brains what we could have done to help her achieve the goal that she said she wanted. However, perhaps there's something else going on in her life where having the baby in the hospital means it meets another goal. maybe she really needs the support of her in-laws because they have been generous with their money, they have been generous with their time. They don't agree with this. If she births in the hospital, she is going to have the support she needs. That's an important goal.
Mhm.
So the home birth doesn't work out. She gets to the hospital, she has the baby there. She calls her in-laws and says, "Guess what? The baby came. I'm with the doctor now." They visit, they're generous. She has the support for this next several years that she actually needed. So we have to really think, does the home birth go off the rails or, end up in a hospital because we didn't do enough, she didn't work out her trauma? Humans are complex. Maybe there's something there that she just had to achieve. Maybe it was unfinished business. Maybe her first birth went way off the rails in the hospital, but she has it's unfinished business. The story needs to close. And maybe she needed to transfer back there during birth or afterwards to complete the story. Maybe she had to be back there so that she could complete the story the way she needs to complete it. So I think there's a lot of complexities here, and I think we need to be a lot gentler with our own journey. Also, do you have to work out your previous trauma for your next baby? Well, probability is no, because working your shit out and resolving trauma takes time. It's a journey. It's like a grief journey. Working through trauma, it's a grief journey, and it ebbs and flows and comes and goes and rises and falls and circles back again. And the truth is, in the childbearing years, women just they haven't been alive long enough. There just hasn't been enough time. If she had her babies in her 60s, well, she's probably worked out a lot of stuff and everything's probably worked out pretty well. She's had lots of time to figure things out. But in her childbearing years, it just hasn't been enough time. And that's okay. It's okay.
You're so wise. I really appreciate everything that you're saying, everything that you're sharing with so many women that need to hear this, and so many families that are putting too much pressure on themselves to achieve something that is pretty popular right now. Popular for good reason, because we're trying to reduce medical obstetric abuse. We're trying to reduce trauma in the birth space. Um, but don't put so much pressure on yourself. You can have a birth plan. That's okay. It's probably going to go out the window.
Nobody's going to read it, so don't worry about
Nobody
it.
highlight it and put stickers on it. They're not going to look at it. That's okay. But if it makes you feel better, it helps out your logistical mind to write that thing and put it out there. Go for it. I through my years of attending births, it's coming up to 10 years now, and I find my job has gotten a lot easier because I don't put so much pressure on myself, and I try not to I have no expectations. When I get the phone call, "Oh, I'm having my sensations, they're really picking up. I'd like to have you in the space now." It's like, okay, clean slate, few deep breaths. Let's see what happens here. Yeah. So
That's why one of the favorite parts of that part of my life was the car ride there. Getting in the car, driving there, not knowing what it was going to be, and just the optimism of new life coming and the prayer to be a more useful human if needed. And just, I love that part of it.
it's very simple holding space for women, in my opinion. And now maybe it's because I have had the experience, right? But it feels very simple to hold a woman's hand and whisper sweet things to her and remind her that she's doing great and give her sips of water and keep her hydrated and fed. It's just very simple tasks. The duty of an attendant is, in that way, very simple. Energetically, it can feel hard, right? Because when things do go sideways and they don't go according to plan, because they never really do, it's the processing in the postpartum period where the work feels difficult for me as an attendant. Because, like you said, we get kind of spun up in our mind thinking about, well, maybe I could have said this or done this and offered this homeopathic remedy and it would have been different, right? But then you just go crazy because it just was what it was and it is what it is. And that family is receiving the birth that they needed in order to be initiated into the path of parenthood. And for some people, that's really intense. And for other families, it's very peaceful and gentle. Um, yeah. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about um, homeopathy. So I use it a little bit. Okay. Like I love the arnica, the idea of arnica. And there is the pulsatilla, which can be used to support a suspected breech baby in that third trimester. Of course, while using it with different spinning baby techniques and being really devoted to trying to move the baby if the baby wants to move, giving them the opportunity to move around into a more head down position. Um, but do you find homeopathy to be very useful?
Yes, I do. Yes, it's also an intervention. So interventions there needs to be an actual problem, and then it can be a holistic solution for it. I do not support the idea of routinely giving homeopathy to prepare the mother for labor. The only thing she needs to prepare for labor is to be pregnant and then to have some time, and she'll be prepared. So I don't endorse any kind of intervention being used as a just in case or could be a good idea. I think interventions are there to solve problems. So if there's a problem, homeopathy is a very gentle and effective way of treating many, many complications.
And
And
if
that's the same with preparing for labor. The everybody wants to participate. Everybody likes that's like birth. Although it's behind the locked doors of L&D, it's still in some ways a community event. When I was having my babies, it was very much a sisterhood, and I called my women. My women came. We all had a great time. There was eating and champagne afterwards, and life was grand. But in some ways, it's still very much a community event. Everybody's invested in the baby coming out. They all want to rub your belly. They want to tell you their horrible story, and they want to help you get the baby out. So, have you tried castor oil? Have you tried, if you go see your reflexologist, well, they could do the acupressure points. And did you go see everybody wants to participate in getting this baby out. I had a consultation with a lady, and she was explaining the intensity of her birth, which was just like an oncoming train. I was like, well, you never know. I mean, could be you're efficient, could be it wasn't. And then I learned afterwards, well, she was tea time with all the neighbors, and all the older ladies were, well, you get the baby out with castor oil. So she didn't know why, but that's what you do. So she started doing all the castor oil and said, oh, you had an induction.
hmm,
So that helps to explain why your labor was a bit of an oncoming train. Would a spontaneous birth be the same? It could, but it may not be. But again, everybody wants to participate, and homeopathy is an intervention, and I would never suggest it just because you want to participate in someone else's birth.
right, I feel a good time like use of homeopathy would be warranted when she's saying something like something feels wrong, or why is this taking so long, or I just want a break, I'm so exhausted, or I just want this baby out of my body. Like these are statements that I'm hearing where she feels as though she needs support. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there is something wrong, but it's something to investigate. And we can use that intervention to support this process and this feeling of I'm failing, my body is failing, I think something's wrong. Because it's so gentle. And what I know about homeopathy is that if you don't necessarily need it, the body's not going to use it. If you need it, it's a miracle. It can be a miracle or support the process. Yeah.
Homeopathy kind of works. It works more on an energetic level because once the dilutions are high enough, It exceeds Avogadro's number, so there's no actual molecular entity of the original, but there is the energetic imprint, which is information. So when the homeopathy is taken in, it provides information to the body to tell it what to do. And if it addresses the right issue, then the body has information to respond.
It doesn't interact with the cells.
No.
So cool. I gotta learn more. I need to do a big course on homeopathy now. Add that to my bag. That and a million other courses and workshops you can do. Right?
Endless learning. It's pretty fantastic.
It's so fun. I just can't wait to be in the elder era of my life and this grown woman who has been attending birth since the age of 17, 18. It's like that's going to be a really interesting, those are going to be some great stories. And that's why I love chatting with you, Billie, is you're such an inspiration. You're entering an era of your life where you now get to share the wisdom and this it's like the rose is really now blossomed and you're like sharing your petals all over the place. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I've had it was just a stream of some of the most extraordinary experiences at home birth. I know that I've seen more than most regulated midwives at home birth because they would never support my clientele. My clientele is not the picture perfect low risk, so they would never see the things I've seen. And I used to think, isn't this supposed to be simple 99% of the time? Why isn't it? And I knew that it was actually in preparation for the elder years of being able to teach that I would have seen significantly more. And I'm very grateful for that. Very grateful for the families that invited me there. Very grateful for their experiences and grateful for the opportunity to just be a more useful human.
Thank you, Mother Billie. Is there anything else you feel like sharing with those who are listening today?
The rise, I'm calling it, the reclamation of the neighbor, the reclamation of birth through neighborly love. We can do this. Medical services will always be needed, but we can reduce iatrogenic harm by taking a good hard look. What have we been programmed to believe? What are we afraid of? What's the actual likelihood? Deal with the fright. And as neighbors, we can reclaim birth from this gong show it's become and return it to the bosom of the family, to the circle of womanhood, to it being honored, and learn how to be healthier. It doesn't mean we're going to go back to the days where women were dying in droves because of the filthy, unwashed hands of physicians. We're not going back to that. We don't live in those days. This is a very different day. And I just feel so much optimism at the direction we're heading. Of course, we're getting pushed back, but whatever. We're made of sterner stuff than that.
Indeed, it made me so. Bless you, Billie. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I love talking to you.
All right. Take care.
You too. Thank you again.